I'm making video essays on every single entry in the Scream franchise. Being perfectly honest, the fourth entry in the franchise is one that has constantly shifted in its placement when doing my overall rankings for the movies. Interestingly enough, I have fond memories of when this movie was released. Being a member of the Scream community at the time it hit theatres way back in 2011, and seeing the hype for the franchise seemingly resurge after 11 years was a genuine highlight of my teenage years. Upon more recent rewatches of the movie, it has fluctuated in my rankings, especially more so since the release of Scream 2022 and Scream 6. Before I rewatched the movie, its placement was somewhere down the list in my rankings, and I'm not the only one who thinks this. Its audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is the second lowest in the entire franchise, with even MTV Scream ranking somewhat higher. Fan response to this movie is actually quite mixed. There's a huge amount of support for the movie over on social media, with the general appreciation being for characters like Jill Roberts and Kirby Reed. Quite honestly, I didn't know what I was going to discuss with this movie from a thematic standpoint. Because of this, I sat down and watched the movie without the inclusion of the rest of the franchise, and whilst watching, I was pleasantly surprised at how well this movie functions as a standalone entry in the franchise. So, I decided to assess this movie as a singular entry, and rightfully so. The movie isn't part of the initial trilogy, nor does it attempt to start another one, so that makes this movie stand in between all 6 entries with no continual story, no unanswered questions. It's just straight after 3, but the franchise changes course in the 5th entry. I realised after watching that this movie does not get the credit it deserves.
You pretty much have to be gay.
Before we go further into the movie, let's discuss the reasons why this movie likely ranks lower in Scream fans' minds. Negative aspects of the movie dominated my viewpoint initially, and I'm sure those that have issues with it will probably agree. From a directional standpoint, the movie doesn't actually progress any of its characters in any way the previous entries do. We don't really go on any kind of journey with any of the characters except one, which I will get to later. Not even Sidney Prescott receives much development in this movie, who had been the main character in the first 3 movies. We are introduced to new characters, but by the climax of the movie, 95% of these characters are dead, with only Kirby Reed and Judy Hicks emerging as the 2 surviving newbies. 2 characters who, despite their impact, specifically Kirby, didn't really progress as characters in my opinion. I think one of the main reasons this movie struggled to win over audiences was because it attempted to continue the story of a seemingly concluded trilogy 11 years later. Because the first 3 movies flowed continuously, with the 3rd wrapping up the overarching story from the original movie, Scream 4 had a tough task of bringing people back to the theatres to see a Scream movie once again, only this time the story was different. Upon watching the movie, I was reminded of how it is casually placed into a similar category as Scream 2022, in the sense it revisited Woodsboro and attempted to research the franchise. This is one of the main things fans often get wrong about Scream 4, which I will explain in detail in a moment. Another reason this movie likely ranks lower in fans' rankings is that the characters we loved and rooted for in the original trilogy returned, making the climax of the 3rd movie somewhat less impactful, as the happy ending we see in that movie turns out to be a false conclusion for the characters. Now that Scream 2022 has started up a fresh new story for the franchise, this has only made Scream 4's flaws stand out more. In actual fact, I believe we should give this movie more credit than it actually has. It's not my favourite in the series, but I believe it does a lot of things better than what we see in Scream 2022, for example. One thing the 4th movie absolutely gets right is the way it integrates the newer generation cast with the legacy characters without making them irrelevant or shoehorned in for the purpose of nostalgia. Sydney and Gale Weathers specifically have large roles in this movie, and it doesn't feel tired. In fact, Courtney Cox's performance in this movie is one of my favourites of her in the entire franchise.
Fuck you. Let's go.
Her attempt to recapture her former life, and the inclusion of her trying to catch the killer alongside Dewey, made the character so relatable that it highlighted a very important topic, not just for the movie, but for relationships also. Gale sacrificed a lot of her career up for her life with Dewey, and while she had no regrets, that decision would ultimately take a toll on their relationship, something the 4th movie covered quite extensively. One of the other things that I absolutely believe this movie gets no credit for is the decision to attempt something different. Before watching the movie, I was someone who believed the fourth movie simply rehashed the original. The difference here is that the movie constantly keeps the audience on their toes throughout. If we sit and think about this movie, does it really rehash the original? Despite the characters on screen actively discussing how this movie is a remake, I found myself having to sit and think considerably about how the pattern kills did actually mirror the original. If you think too hard about this, it highlights one important thing that's often overlooked. This movie is not rehashing the original. The original movie was somewhat intimate. It followed Sidney Prescott on a journey and the story progressed mainly from her point of view. The pattern of the original movie is completely lost here. The movie continues this notion as the characters state how the events will unfold, only for those exact events to take a complete different turn. If this were the original remade, Jill Roberts would have been the standalone character, and we'd have followed her journey throughout the movie, with different characters showing up as she interacted with them. In actual fact, the audience is led to believe that the character is the new Sydney, but as the pattern of the original movie falls apart, we learn this simply isn't the case. This was all intentional, and in my opinion, it makes this movie one of the most unique in the franchise. After the somewhat toned down third movie, seeing Ghostface back to his brutal self was a welcome addition to the movie. The scene where Ghostface calls Kirby and Jill, followed by Olivia's death, is one of the most brutal moments in the franchise in my opinion. It showcased how violent this killer was, and in one scene, we not only get a great but tense phone call, we also get a brutal death and the reintroduction of Sydney back into the fold as she is reunited with Ghostface once again. The main aspect that made this movie so memorable and great was actually in one newly introduced character, in my opinion. That character is Jill Roberts. Jill, in my opinion, improves this movie significantly, so much so that as I reached the end of the movie I realised this specific story wasn't about Sydney, it wasn't about any of the new characters introduced that were dispatched. This movie was Jill's. When I watched this back, I was surprised at how little Jill actually appeared on screen before her reveal. In fact, when she did appear, her dialogue was so subtle, the character seemed somewhat uninteresting to a point. I believe one major component that makes Jill as a serial killer stand out is the fact that her motive is so relatable today. Her desire to become famous for doing absolutely nothing, and her envy of her cousin having the fame that she desires, is something that is relevant to the way people become famous today. As soon as Jill is revealed to be one of the killers, she goes from being a somewhat uninteresting character to becoming the most developed character in the movie. We learn so much from her in the scenes in Kirby's kitchen.
I mean, for fuck's sake, my own mother had to die. No great loss there, so I could stay true to the original.
There are pieces of dialogue that help build this overall picture for her, that's something no other character really has in this movie. The whole one-to-one with Sydney literally highlights how unhinged she is, but we as an audience also somewhat understand her motive to a point. I realised how impactful Jill was as a killer, and how one thing that distinguishes her from the rest is how she almost got away with her crimes. That's an impressive feat, something that has only been spoken about in the final acts that came before, but actually came to fruition in this movie. Even in the hospital scenes, we still stay with Jill. The movie intimately follows Jill from the moment she removes her mask. The self-mutilation scene is a moment in the franchise I likely view different from most. This is single-handedly the most intimate scene we see from any of the killers to date. We see her plan this event, we see her stage the crime, and we see the panic on her when she discovers that Sydney is alive. It's a huge amount of intimacy the audience gets with one of the Ghostface killers in the franchise. It's that level of intimacy that helps us go on a journey with the character. That's why, to me, this movie absolutely belongs to Jill. Kirby Reed was an interesting diversion for the audience, but characteristically speaking, she, like Jill, keeps the audience on their toes. She's believed to be similar to Tatum Riley. She's Jill's best friend, lends her support when needed, and the pair even share a room at one point. However, Kirby's role was actually a combination of Tatum and Randy Meeks, with her horror movie knowledge being a driving factor for the character's popularity. I believe the character's traits for her made her somewhat more likeable than Randy, which may be an unpopular opinion for most. This character was so well loved by fans. The speculation regarding her survival was even discussed in the build-up to Scream 2022. I touched upon this earlier, but one of the better aspects of this movie, and one of the reasons I believe it deserves more credit than it actually gets, is that in one sense it treads no new ground in terms of story. It brings nothing to the table in terms of progressions. However, it takes what made Scream so great and actually churns out an impressive movie overall. One thing that did occur to me during my watch of the movie is that this movie has some pretty great death scenes. Characters are killed at a regular pace, and it's not just their kills that are great. The characters themselves have some great inclusions to the story. Characters like Rebecca Walters, Robbie Mercer, and even Trevor Sheldon, they're not the greatest Scream characters ever, but their presence on screen isn't overly forgetful. Everyone in Scream 4 served a kind of purpose, even the opening scene kills for example. Jenny Randall was a huge overarching character for the story. Her liaison with Trevor Sheldon had resulted in the breakdown of his relationship with Jill Roberts. For me, I personally believe this act may have been what pushed her over the edge for good. One of the final points I need to touch upon is the ultimate decision to not remake the franchise. This is a huge deal here. At this time during the late 2010s, horror movies were receiving remake after remake. Rather than jump on the riding bandwagon, Wes Craven actually decided to continue the Scream story, but bring the remake aspect into full effect, without actually remaking the original movies. This was a bold movie, and in my opinion highlighted how different Scream is to the rest of its kind. It's able to function and continue moving to suit the times, and never gets caught up in the current trend. Instead, the trend becomes a part of its story, and they showcase it through characters and the Ghostface dialogue. The same has happened 11 years later. With Scream 2022, the franchise has adapted to the current times, but it still continues the story within the universe. Countless slasher franchises have received remakes, reboots and so on. So much so, timelines are inconsistent and lack a real flow. This movie is not my favourite Scream movie, but as a standalone movie I believe it provides everything to the audience that makes Scream so good. It doesn't feel like it continues a story, nor does it feel like it's heading anywhere by the climax, but it takes you on a slasher-filled ride from start to finish. It's self-aware, highlights many interesting aspects within the era it was set, and in my opinion, contains the most intimate, fascinating serial killer to date, something that hasn't been topped, even with the more recent movies in my opinion. Thank you so much for watching guys, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and look out for more great videos on the way.